Marcus sat on the steps of his front porch for 10 minutes without going inside. Rick's car pulled into the driveway at 1:20 p.m. The Ring doorbell camera recorded the time clearly and even captured the license plate. When Marcus discovered this footage in the supermarket parking lot, he pushed the shopping cart aside, got into his truck, stared at the timestamp for a moment, and then texted his lawyer friend of over 10 years, Ray. "Ray, my name is signed on her company's supplier contracts. Does a business operated during the marriage count as joint property?" Ray replied quickly, "In most states, yes. Do you have records of capital contribution or evidence of involvement in the operations?" Marcus replied, "Plenty." He drove home, carried the supermarket bags to the porch, sat down on the steps, suppressed that breath of anger for 10 minutes, then stood up, opened the door, and went inside. In the living room, Diane and Rick were sitting on the sofa. The distance between them suggested they were more than just friends. Rick stood up, instinctively wanting to reach out his hand. Marcus's gaze swept over him, like sweeping over an unfamiliar piece of furniture, and walked into the kitchen to boil water. Diane followed him in, cleared her throat, and said the sentence she had probably practiced many times in her mind. "Marcus, let's end this. Being with Rick is something I've seriously considered. What we have has existed in name only for a long time." Marcus turned around and looked her squarely in the eye for the first time. He remembered what she was like the year she first started. She knew nothing. It was he who had helped her negotiate with the first batch of suppliers and helped her drive the prices down to 70% of the industry average. He helped her spend 2 years visiting church clients door to door, sending gifts on holidays, helping people fix their heating, accompanying elderly deacons to chat about the Bible, building up a good reputation one by one. She thought it was called My Company, while he thought it was called Our Career. Later, the company got on track, the child was sent to boarding school, and she changed her social circle, changed her friends. Men like Rick, who always dressed impeccably and never got dirt on their hands, began to appear by her side. The way she introduced him at parties became, "This is Marcus, the stay-at-home one," with a tone as if referring to an insignificant old item. A person doesn't change overnight. They are slowly carved away by 1,000 small razor blades. Rick walked to the kitchen doorway, hands in his pockets, chin slightly raised. That posture was a declaration. Diane raised her voice, articulating every word clearly. "Get out, Marcus. You wouldn't last a week without me. This house, the company, everything is mine. You were never anything here." Rick's mouth twitched at the door, smiling a very safe smile. Marcus turned off the stove, opened his mouth, his voice very flat. "Fine. My lawyer is called Ray. Have your lawyer contact him. Marital joint assets will be divided according to the rules, and the company's valuation requires a third-party assessment." Diane was stunned. Rick's smile faded by half. Marcus picked up his coat and keys, walked toward the door, stopped at the door, turned to glance at Rick, and said in a very casual tone, "By the way, how did you handle those previous cases of yours? I've been a bit curious lately." Rick's facial expression changed very quickly, but too late to cover it up. Marcus went out, closed the door, the sound as light as if nothing had happened. He got into his truck, called Dennis, and said, "Help me look into Rick's background. I need everything about his past." Dennis paused for a second on the other end of the phone and said, "Bro, I've been checking for a while now, just waiting for you to open your mouth. When do you need it?" A printed document was spread out on the desk in Dennis's study, 7 pages long. Rick, over the past 9 years, had successively established intimate relationships with 4 women who owned properties. The documented playbook was the same: emotional involvement, gaining trust, inducing them to sign variously named joint investment agreements, and then transferring the money away through LLC structures. One of the cases went to court and was settled out of court. The amount was confidential, but the file was archived. The most recent victim took a net loss of a house. Marcus finished reading the 7 pages, folded them, put them into an envelope, wrote down Diane's office address, wrote her name as the recipient, and called a courier to deliver it. A note was tucked into the envelope with only one line of text. Before he asks you to sign any documents, read this first. After sending it, he and Dennis drove to the Episcopal Church, not calling, but showing up right at the door. Deacon Dorothy opened the door and saw him, froze for a second, then held the door wide open and said, "Marcus, come on in. I was meaning to contact you yesterday." He sat in Dorothy's small living room for nearly an hour, drank 2 cups of tea, and explained the situation clearly. He and Diane were going through divorce proceedings, and he was going to continue doing the banquet business himself. Still the original team, the original suppliers, and the original standards. After listening, Dorothy put down her teacup and said, "Marcus, 4 years ago you helped us fix that leaking heating pipe. The tools were your own. You didn't charge a single cent, and you crawled under the floorboards in the dead of winter for over 3 hours. I remember that. The contracts go with you, not with the name." He left the church and went to visit the administrators of 2 schools. Before evening, the annual banquet contracts for 3 churches and 2 schools were all verbally confirmed to go with him. At the same time, Diane's afternoon was a complete mess. The lawyer told her that the state mandated the division of marital joint property. The company required an independent valuation, and Marcus's signatures on the supplier contracts were evidence of operational participation. Everything had to be calculated into the assets, and a conservative estimate of the number he could walk away with made Diane's hands run half cold. Just as she hung up the phone, the courier arrived. She tore open the envelope, read the 7 pages from beginning to end, and when she finished, the phone dropped onto the desk. She picked it up, called Rick, her voice very flat, and asked just one question. "Do you know Patricia?" The other end of the line went silent for 4 full seconds. Just those 4 seconds, everything was said. Diane hung up the phone and drove to the restaurant they usually frequented. Rick was already sitting there. Seeing her come in, he stood up, that habitual smile still hanging on his face. Diane sat down opposite him, slapped the 7 pages onto the table, and said, "The joint investment agreement you asked me to sign last month, that LLC under your name was registered 3 months ago, and its assets are 0. What did you want to do with that agreement?" Rick glanced at the document on the table, his face darkened, and he lowered his voice to say, "You can find anything in materials like this online. You can't." Diane interrupted him, her voice even lower, but biting off every word sharply. "I had someone check the case file for Patricia's case, and I know the settlement agreement amount too. Rick, you tell me, what number am I?" People at other tables in the restaurant began to eavesdrop. Rick stood up to leave. Diane stood up too, her voice unsuppressed, and said, "Rick, you stop right there." Rick turned around, suppressing his anger, and said in a low voice, "Calm down, you are making an ugly scene." The words, "ugly scene," ignited her. She raised her hand and delivered a solid slap to his face, crisp and loud, and the entire restaurant went quiet for a whole second. Rick clutched his face, grabbed her wrist, and pushed it aside. The force wasn't great, but the action was very obvious. 3 people had already raised their phones, and the restaurant manager rushed over quickly to block them in the middle. Rick looked around, let go of his hand, took off the watch from his wrist that Diane had bought for him using the company account, and smacked it onto the table. He picked up his coat and strode out, his steps twice as fast as when he came in. Diane stood there, the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. On the table were those 7 pages and that watch, the chair not yet pushed back. Rick thought walking away was the end of it. It wasn't. A blogger Dennis knew compiled those records into an article and posted it, naming names, with a clear timeline and factual statements. Not a single word was fabricated. In the WeChat groups and Facebook groups of the local real estate industry, this matter spread that very night. The boss of the real estate company Rick was affiliated with called him into the office the next morning and spread screenshots of that article on the desk. He said one sentence, "Rick, do you know what is most important to our company? It is client trust." You figure out your next steps yourself. What made Rick break down even more came later. He found a lawyer to push that investment agreement, and after checking, the lawyer came back and told him that the company under Diane's name was undergoing marital joint asset division proceedings. The validity of any agreement involving company assets before the division is completed is questionable. Coupled with the fact that it was signed without the informed consent of the other spouse, this agreement was basically void. He sat in the parking lot of that law firm for a long time. That chin that was always raised, for the first time, didn't know where to put itself. Diane called that night. The first call Marcus didn't answer. The second he answered, didn't speak, waiting for her to open her mouth. Diane was silent for almost 10 seconds, her voice hoarse, and said, "I will sign for the divorce. You name the terms. Yesterday it was, get out, you are nothing. Today it is, you name the terms." Marcus leaned back against the back of his chair and said, "Once the joint asset valuation results are out, I want my half in cash, deposited within 3 months. I don't want company shares, don't want the house, just want cash." Diane took a sharp breath in and said, "Then the house will have to be mortgaged." Marcus said, "I know. This is what I deserve for staying in this marriage for 10 years. It's not much." There was a long silence on that end, and then Diane said, "Okay." Then she said something Marcus didn't expect, her voice even lower, saying, "The matter with Rick, those materials, did you send them?" Marcus didn't deny it and said, "I sent them. Before he let you sign the agreement, you should know who you are dealing with." Silence. Then Diane said one sentence and hung up right after saying it, without waiting for his answer. "Marcus, I understand it now." With just those 5 words, Marcus stood on the balcony for a while, tucked his phone back into his pocket, and went downstairs to help Dennis clean up the kitchen. The business license for the new company was obtained that week, and Dennis helped him set up the water and electricity in the warehouse. Several workers who had been with him for years messaged to ask if he needed people. He said he did, wages according to the old rules, paid monthly, no holding back pay. The Thanksgiving banquet was the new company's first big order, Dorothy's Church, 48 tables. From setting up the stage to serving the dishes to wrapping up, Marcus was present the whole time, black apron, moving tables, and greeting every elderly person he knew, able to call out their names. After the crowd dispersed, Dorothy held his hand and said, "Marcus, that honey-roasted turkey. The elderly people have been talking about it for a whole year." He said, "I will continue to make it next year." Dennis was waiting for him in the parking lot, leaning against the car, handed him a bottle of beer, and asked, "How does it feel?" Marcus twisted off the bottle cap, took a sip, and said, "Not bad." Dennis said, "It is said that Rick is now going to another city to start over." Marcus said, "Let him." He finished that bottle of beer, started the car, and drove out of the parking lot. The streetlights pulled the shadows very long. The autumn night wind slipped in through the crack of the car window, a bit cool, just right. The phone lit up. It was the receipt confirmation sent by Dorothy and the booking deposit for next year's Easter banquet. Marcus stopped at the red light and replied with 3 words, "I got it." The green light came on. He stepped on the gas pedal. Counting from the timestamp of that video footage, exactly 24 hours.